All right, welcome everybody to our first ever Giddy Up for Good live broadcast to help you train for Rebecca's Giddy Up Challenge. I'm Rebecca Rusch, 7-time world champion, mountain bike Hall of Famer, founder of the Be Good Foundation, Rebecca's Private Idaho, and I've been an athlete for 4 decades in many different sports, mostly ultra endurance events, and I have the honor today of being joined by my coach Tim Cusick, and he is described as the science of data meets the art of coaching. And for any of you who've ever worked with a coach, you realize how essential it is that somebody's super smart at the science, but also what Tim's really great about is bringing it down to like a normal person level. And it's been really motivating for me to have him explain what's going on and motivating to know that the training is working. Tim is the product leader for Training Peaks, WKO. He's an educator, he's a coach, he's an instructor, and he's also a professional coach for world-class athletes, including myself, Amber Neben, Bex Durrell, Emma Grant, and he does, I've only been working with Tim since November, but what's been amazing, like I said, is he has really been able to break down the science of training and put it in terms that have been really motivating for me. So we decided to launch this webinar for Rebecca's Giddy Up Challenge, and we're calling it Science and Stoke. So Tim's going to bring the science and really kind of help you in this short amount of time that we have to get ready for this amazing challenge. And I'm going to bring the stoke to kind of share some personal experience and get you guys loaded up for what's ahead. All right, let's switch to the next slide. Tim's driving here.
I'm driving. A momentary technical difficulty, but we're good now.
That's all right. So we're breaking it down. We just have less than 3 weeks before Rebecca's Giddy Up Challenge. And if you're on this webinar, you're either already signed up or you're thinking about it. And our goal here is to really help you in that amount of time, stack the odds in your favor and be at your absolute best. And so we've got the sessions organized in 3 categories. And the first one today is really on preparing for your challenge, selecting your challenge, and general training. And then we'll move on to organizing and eventually executing your challenge. All right, so as I said, today is preparing for your challenge. So Tim, go ahead and take it away and give the team some instructions here.
Okay, great. Thanks for the great introduction. That was no pressure to perform well today. Thank you. It's really great to be able to be part of the Giddy Up Challenge team. I really appreciate you and your team putting this on. I think it's great to have, give people something to motivate them to get out and to continue to ride and challenge themselves towards goals. And a great job you guys are doing to raise money for charity. So that's awesome. One of the things I love about doing these type of webinars versus maybe a Zoom meeting or a more social is it gives everybody the opportunity to ask questions. So if you want to ask questions, the way we really encourage you to do it is ask your questions as Rebecca and I present, because sometimes you think of a question and you're waiting all the way to the end of the webinar and you forget, right? What was my question, or what did I really want to know? If you look at the little control panel on the right-hand side, there's a little orange arrow you can open and close, and yours might look slightly different than what I have on the screen here. This is mine as an organizer. But if you use that arrow to open and close, and then scroll down till you see the question box, pretty much right here, you can see the word questions, open it up, and you can type a question in here. I have another screen up here that I'm watching questions happen in the background. So sometimes I'm like looking over you, it's because I'm reading the questions. So enter them as you go. And what we'll do is we'll get to them all in the end. If there's 1 or 2 really important questions when it comes up, I'm going to facilitate the questions to Rebecca and I. If something really important comes up, I'll go ahead and kind of stop it for a second and just make sure I get that question in. So with that, let's go ahead and get started.
All right, awesome. So I want to give you a little bit of background first on why I launched Rebecca's Giddy Up Challenge. I came home from Alaska. My last big event that I did was that Iditarod Trail Invitational, 350 miles through the Alaskan wilderness. And I came home really excited for a bunch of goals that I had on my calendar. And of course, as we all know, events have been canceled and our world has been turned upside down. And, you know, working with Tim, I was really lacking motivation of how do you train for something when you don't know what you're training for. And so what I decided to do, one, it was motivated for a few reasons. One, to personally give myself a big challenge to shoot for. I find that I do a lot better if I have something big and scary coming up. It just really holds me accountable. And so I wanted to launch a big goal that would kind of be in a line with a big event that I had been training for that's now not on the calendar. And so Tim and I were really struggling to kind of get me off the couch, so to speak, really literally. And you might think that professional athletes are always super motivated. It's not the case. And I was really kind of in a slump with this pandemic going on. And so personally, I needed a goal, but I also really felt like I wanted to help other people. If I was experiencing this, I wanted to help other people have a goal and something to shoot for. And then the third part of it was really to feel like I had to do something proactive about the COVID-19 virus. And, you know, we can't just sit here and sort of cry over spilt milk or wish we could go back in time, because it doesn't work that way. And just like, you know, getting lost on the Iditarod Trail, you're in it and you're in a situation, we're in a situation that isn't ideal. And so I really wanted to be proactive, one, to motivate myself, to motivate all of you and connect our cycling and running and sports community. And number three, to do something for COVID relief. So all of you who are entered, your money is going towards the CDC Foundation, World Bicycle Relief, that provides bikes for healthcare workers in Africa, and also People for Bikes, that is working for bicycle infrastructure. And so it's this collective goal. We're all going to ride on the same weekend with different challenges. You choose the challenge that works for you. But it really was about me helping myself, you guys helping motivate me, and all of us doing something proactive to kind of get us out of this global slump. So that's why I launched it. You know, a lot of times people too will say, well, I don't really care about a race. Why do I need to sign up for a race or an event? And for me, what I find is that when I'm physically healthy and I'm physically active, I do better at my work. I do better with my family. I'm just a nicer person. I'm more proactive. I'm more productive. You know, today is a really good example. Tim forces me to get on Zwift, and we join every Tuesday, Thursday for a ride. And I get off those rides feeling not more tired, but actually more energized for my work day. And so I really do believe that it's important for all of us to take care of our physical health, which we can control, and in turn it's a spiral domino effect that will, you know, strengthen your emotional health and the other work that you're doing the rest of the time. I find when I'm not training, I start to spiral downward in all the other parts of my life. And so I really do believe if the world all got up and did rides and runs every morning, no matter how short they are, that it really doesn't improve the rest of your life. And so an event for me is a good way to stay accountable. The reason it's a community event is that me knowing that all of you guys are going to ride with me on Memorial Day weekend is motivating for me. And I know that I need to step up because you're all going to be there and be joining me. And even though people are physically apart, there's a really cool collective energy when we do something together at the same time that is super powerful. And, you know, this is more than just a ride or run, because like I said, it really is making a difference. You know, my personal mission statement is to continually challenge and inspire myself and others to be good. And so there's two parts of that equation. It's about me, but it's also about other people and my community. And I have realized that my bike is really a vehicle to help improve the world. And so you guys are all part of it with the Giddyup Challenge. All right, Tim.
Excellent. Sorry, the little bit of technical, you're never going to get away with the first one without a little bit of technical difficulty. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the science of selecting your event. So the reality is we have different challenges that are available for you in the Giddyup challenge, ranging from a full Everest to some lessers, which I'm going to show you in a moment. The best place to start as you think about your challenge, and you can do this challenge outdoors or indoors. So let's just talk about outdoors first, then indoors. Really, before you even specifically define which challenge you're going to tackle, you might want to just start simply by starting out with Strava and using the segment explore function. If you utilize the segment explore function, you can search your general area, within 5 miles of you, 10 miles of you, 50 miles of you. You could just zoom the map in and out and find different climbs. They actually have a function that allows you to control the category of the climb that you're searching for. So what I would do is I would look for climbs that were kind of category 3 and above, maybe category 2 and above, and that you might think are going to take you somewhere between 20 and 45 minutes. And this is where I want you to start looking outside first, because the reality is even a 20-minute climb, not all of us have a 20-minute climb in our area, right? You might be more limited than that. So start with the search and find climbs that are in that range. Look for an average of a 6 to 7% type of grade. I'll explain why a little later. And preferably, but not has to be, make it something you know. So the second thing you can do is, like, let's say maybe you absolutely don't have an option, or maybe unfortunately you're still in a scenario where riding outside might not be feasible. Hopefully we'll all be through that by this time period, but it might be. Then let's take a look at an indoor option. So if you use a program called Velo Viewer, you can look at all of the, whether you use Zwift or other online programs, you can look at the stat breakdown of their climbs. And you could literally, using Velo Viewer, just Google search Velo Viewer Zwift climbs, and you'll get a nice clean list of all the different climbs. Again, there's options there for you. I would target a climb that would take you about 30 to 60 minutes indoors. I would look for an average grade of about 7 to 9%. And again, you can log on to Zwift and ride it first to make sure. If you're going to do an indoor, I would really encourage you to simply use the Alp to Zwift. It really is perfectly suited for doing an indoor Everest attempt, or an indoor, some accumulation of climbing feet or meters, depending on how you're looking at it, where you come from. So the reality is Alp to Zwift is probably the best. I actually have that example on the screen here. It's 3,300 feet per climb, and that takes about 70 minutes. So it's a little outside of the range of recommendations I'm making here. But the reality is it fits perfectly within this challenge. So start off by looking at your outdoor possibilities and your indoor possibilities. Once you've kind of taken a good look at what's out there, then start thinking of your challenge. There's 4 different options available to you here, ranging from the Queen's Everest to mashed potato to twice baked potato to the baked potato. And these are all different ranges, and you can see ranging from 29,000 feet of climbing to 5,300, a little rounding, feet of climbing. So then you have to plan. The next step you want to do is take a look at how many reps. So from that Strava screen before, let's say I was planning on doing this outside, I found a local climb. This is called Big Flat. It's 4.61 miles long, and it gains about 1,156 feet each climb. So then what I start doing there is saying, let me see how that fits into one of these challenges. So I'm just, for this example, going to pick a mashed potato. So in the mashed potato, I need to basically come up with 15,000 plus feet of climbing. So if I look at the total climbing, it's 15,885 to be exact. I use my Strava elevation difference to calculate what my local climb will give me each time I go up it. And then it really is as simple a matter of figuring out the repetitions. You can figure out the repetitions by doing the math, dividing total distance or total feet needed to be climbed, 15,885, by the the amount of feet of each climb, 1,156. So that gives me 13.8 reps. Now the reality though is you plan out. That's step 1. Step 2, which is almost more important into being sure you can tackle your challenge, is you need to estimate the timing of that challenge. So picking up on the same idea of doing the mashed potato on that climb, what I can do is use my Strava data to look at what was my best climb on the big flat hill that I just showed you. And my best climb there is about 20 minutes. I also then looked at some old ride files, and I know it. And when I casually descend off of Big Flat, it takes me about 10 minutes. It's not a high grade, so the descent takes a little time. So my total time per rep is about 30 minutes. To the top and back down takes me about 30 minutes. Well, the reality is, once you kind of look at your data, what you think your best time is, you're clearly not going to do your best time and time again over 13 reps, right? That would be a recipe for disaster. So typically what I recommend people to do for challenges like this and Everest, or maybe anything over 10 to 15,000 feet, use 150% as a target of your all-day pace. So take your best time and use 150% of your best time as your target. You can't go too slow. It actually gets harder if you go too slow, right? The reality is 150% will give you a good timing number. So if you break that down, now I could begin to apply the beginnings of some math and study this out, right? So if my total time is if my total reps are 13.8 times 45 minutes a rep, that's 621 minutes, or that makes my total time 10.2 hours. Now you got to remember, right? Here's where planning and preparing, and the next session we'll do is on planning, and we'll get deeper into this. But I really think it's important that you think about it now. That 10.2 hours is your on the bike time, right? That doesn't include, and in the planning session we'll get into this, but it doesn't include how you should rest, what breaks you're going to take, what about the time it takes to change equipment, new batteries in the light overnight if you're doing overnight or however it works out, change your clothes, all those little things that you never really think about. But over the course of an all-day event like this, suddenly you're like, wow, that's consuming a lot of my time, right? Time is ticking by and I'm running out of time. So in our next session, Rebecca's going to take you through a lot of that planning type and how to think those things out and get ready. So you really have to think, well, if I could ride it in 10.2 hours, I would, again, as a little tip, just we're going to remember, I would use 150% again as a total time for a target like this. So I might say, wow, I could complete the mashed potato on that big flat climb by doing 13.8 reps, which is going to take me about 10 hours on the bike and about probably 15 to 16 total hours, assuming nothing wrong. Meaning you never know, if you have a mechanical, right, there's an hour. But assuming nothing's wrong, you really could break it down to that. 13.8 reps, 10.2 hours on the bike, and probably about 15 to 16 hours of overall time to complete the mashed potato. So that just gives you an understanding of calculation.
I have a question, Tim. So you said to choose a climb that's 6 or 7% grade. If you're trying to hit an elevation challenge, why wouldn't you just choose the absolute steepest climb you could find to get that elevation faster?
Excellent question. So when we think about how we climb, we have a sweet spot, right? In all endurance sports, we tend to use that word a lot. We hear sweet spot, but you have a physiological sweet spot here. As we go up higher and higher grades, right, there is a change, and for some of us, a significant change, and that really depends on our training and our weight and a couple of other factors. Once we start going over like 7-8% grade, it really changes the way we recruit muscle fiber to pedal and make force. It really becomes a matter of kinetic energy. If you really want to get into science, be careful what you ask for, but it changes the way your pedal stroke occurs. And then there's just the simple physical reality of gearing. So as we go up to higher and higher grades, we are forced into lower cadence. We can overcome a certain amount of that with gearing, but we're forced into lower cadence, and we actually have less kinetic energy. We're moving slower. There's less energy in the system, changing the way we pedal and make force, right? So that requires a higher muscular demand. So you end up with on a higher grade climb, a very high muscular demand and a lower cardiovascular demand. If you go the other way, meaning you have too low of a grade, you're going to have a higher cardiovascular demand and a lower muscular demand. And actually at a lower grade, you're just gonna run out of time. It's gonna go too slowly. But the reality is right about 7-8%, that's the sweet spot for most of us of balancing the appropriate blend of not too much of a muscular demand so that you have the muscular stamina to last the whole event. You balance that very well because you're able to maintain a little better speed, a little lighter force in the pedal. That's not quite exact way to say it, but it's a good example. And the reality is you'll use a little less energy or you'll be more efficient. You'll have a little better energy for the all-day effort at that level.
Yeah, it sounds like it's probably kind of like for anybody who does any weights in the gym. It's like trying to do squats with, a max effort. You can only do 2 or 3 repetitions, but if you lighten the weight or choose a not quite as steep of a hill, you can continue that over and over and over again. And so for an endurance event, yeah, it's sort of you don't want that maximum muscular contraction the whole time. You wouldn't be able to sustain it.
Correct. As when we think about a maximum muscular contractile, all muscular fibers have contractile strength, how strong something can contract. It's the matter of how many fibers you need to contract to do the work, right? So if you have a lot of force and a lot of force required, you're contracting a lot of fibers. Therefore, you're using more energy, you're bringing in more blood, you're using more oxygen, more fuel, more waste product also. So that's why you're looking for that balance. Too heavy, too many fibers recruited too quickly. Again, an oversimplification, but too many fibers too quickly, too much energy required, too much waste product being created. You want that perfect balance. 6 to 7, maybe 8% for a well-developed athlete and somebody who's a little lighter. That's right in the sweet spot for picking this challenge.
Sweet. That's good.
All right, let's talk a little bit about training here. And, I've got good news and bad news for you. And whenever I have good news and bad news, I'd rather start with the bad news because then the good news just sounds that much better. It's so much cooler. The reality of the bad news is you really don't have a lot you can impact. You don't have a lot of time to impact your fitness at this point. We're about 21 days out, a little bit more. I can't remember exactly the days are, but you have about 3 weeks of training, right? From a physiological sense, most people adapt to exercise stimuli in about 3 to 8 weeks, maybe even 4 to 8 weeks, depends on how many years you've been training and how developed your training history is, your training maturity is. But the reality is that means for efforts and workload that you're doing right now, you're only going to get a little bit of a bonus by the time you get to the challenge. And as a matter of fact, if you currently jump in training right now and just do a lot of hard training and did that hard training for the next 3 weeks, your performance would actually probably be worse than if you did a little bit of training for the next weeks. And I shouldn't say a little bit, a solid amount of training for the next 2 weeks. And then just tapered and rested a little your way in. And I'm going to give some deeper insight into what I mean by taper so you can plan it now. So at the core of that, I would really make your training the next 2 weeks. And here's a couple of tips. One, consistency is king. I get so many people that will focus on like each workout like it's a tree in a forest, right? And I'm sorry, my dog is of course gonna bark in the background, but we're going, you look at that as, one workout, every workout, and you're thinking about the tree. And if you plant one good tree today, you'll be a better forest. But the reality is it's more about what that forest is shaped like. It's more about managing it, right, as a whole. So you're way better off right now from a fitness sense over the next 2 weeks, getting in, let's say you can get in 4 or 5 days a week. Get in 5 days a week for the next 2 weeks. And even if that means you only can do an hour or 90 minutes each day, you're better off doing that than training 2 days a week at 4 hours. The reality is your body's going to respond to consistency. All training creates is a stimuli, and your body's going to respond to that stimuli. And the stimuli is to break down the body to actually create trauma, within the system or change the homeostasis. And then your body responds by adapting to that. When we apply consistent stimuli, the body sends back a stronger adaptive signal. It tells the mechanism that repairs your immune system. It tells that immune system, wow, this is going to keep happening. You better make improvements in the system so we can deal with it better. So tip 1 is get consistent. Tip 2 is you're going to need stamina to be able to accomplish your challenge, right? But the reality is, in these 2 weeks, if you go out and rode your bike for 6 hours a day trying to build stamina, you're actually going to build too much fatigue probably. Don't get me wrong, if you can get in 1 or 2 longer days a week, great. But even if, unless you have a fair amount of fitness, even if you had the ability to get in long rides right now in 5 a week, I'm not sure I would do it that way, because you're going to create a whole lot of fatigue, and you might not clear that fatigue out of your system come performance day, come the Giddyup challenge day, right? What I would do is use a little science here. That's why I get to be the science side, is when we look at human performance and we look at the relationships of the way energy systems work, we look at the relationship of the way thresholds work, the way your body balances certain chemical reactions and things like that work, there's always relationships, right? And when we look at what, athletes with great stamina or athletes who can build great stamina, we see a direct correlation, a pretty strong one, between threshold and stamina. So let's threshold, we've all heard this term threshold in training. We tend to think of our anaerobic threshold or our lactate threshold as the threshold. We know there's a bunch of them. Technically, it's probably maximal lactate steady state threshold that's we all actually interact with. And you might even know the power term FTP. They all basically represent the same thing. And the reality is, when we look at data of stamina athletes, and this is very true for Rebecca too, you have a direct relationship between your threshold and your stamina. If you increase threshold, right, even with generally shorter workouts, I'm not going to say short workouts, but shorter workouts, your stamina will increase. So over the next 2 weeks, focus on threshold building workouts and 1 or 2 long days a week if you can get it. A great way to build threshold is to build threshold from below. And one of the terms we have there is called sweet spot training. And over the next 2 weeks, I would use sweet spot training, which I'm going to ask Rebecca to explain in the next slide, because she is now doing a fair amount of sweet spot training. This isn't, we practice what we preach around here. We did a bunch of it today, and it was kind of painful. Then when she's done with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the taper. So I'm going to turn it back over to Rebecca to talk about a sweet spot workout.
Awesome. I'm gonna jump back just a little bit for a second when you're choosing your challenge. If some of you are still wavering on, do I do the baked potato, the twice baked, the mashed, or the full Everest? I would encourage you, like Tim said, we have, less than 3 weeks. So, the bad news is you're not going to change your fitness a lot, but the good news is there are a lot of other things other than just training your heart out that can improve your performance for the event weekend. And that's what these webinars are about, is really to make sure you're tip top at your best with nutrition, hydration, the focus kind of training you can do. And so when you're choosing your challenge, look at those elevation numbers. And if the baked potato, a little over 5,000 feet, if you already know, oh, I can do that, then you should choose the next one up. The whole point of this is to choose something harder than you think you can do. And that's why I chose the Everest, because, I've never done that before. And I needed something that I was going to take seriously enough to really focus on it. And so don't take it too easy on yourself. I would push up a level. If you know you already can do 10,000 feet, go for 15. And if you fail, and you don't get it, then you still have done more than the 10,000 or the lower goal that you knew you could already achieve today. And then I would also say, if you're not really versed in Strava and Zwift and all those things, I just went out last weekend. I've done the hill that I chose a lot, but I went and rode it a couple times just to get a feel for it, to time how long it took me in my current fitness. I knew my best time, but I'm not there right now. And so I just went out and rode it and just started the Garmin and got the elevation and got a feel for it. So some hands-on riding once you've chosen your hill is a good idea too. Sweet spot intervals. It's kind of a nice name. They don't sound that hard, right? Sweet spot sounds great.
It's a trick.
They kind of are. So these are basically, you know, intervals that are longer in session. So you can see a sample workout here with, you know, 2 times 20 minutes effort with 5 minutes rest in between. And this pace, you know, if you're on perceived exertion, this is like medium hard. You know, it's something, what I love about sweet spot and these kinds of intervals is you really feel like you're doing something, but it's not killing you. You know, you aren't vomiting and falling off the bike. And that's kind of what Tim is saying is if you're doing max effort, you know, 10-hour rides on the weekends to prepare for this, you know, due to the short amount of time, you're going to dig yourself into a hole of fatigue. And that's not where we're at. We're really wanting to maximize where you are right now and making sure you're at your absolute best. And so these intervals are really fun, and it's really it's kind of, if you take your hill, you know, the pace that you could maintain going up your 20 or 30-minute hill, you should be able to, you know, talk a little. You're not talking in full sentences and having a big old chat, but you're also able to get some words out. So like I said, it should feel kind of that really good kind of hard that feels like you're doing something, but that it's not killing you. There is a short amount of rest in between these, a 20-minute interval with a 5-minute rest. And the reason for that is because it is at a pace that you can maintain for longer. It's not your 1-minute sprint pace. And if you find, you know, you can't maintain the full 20 minutes, then you've chosen a little bit too hard of an effort. And a little strategy that Tim and I have been doing is doing the first one at a certain effort, and then if I feel good towards the second one, I might bring it up 1% or 2%. But keeping in mind that you still have the goal of, you need to be able to complete the interval. So if you up your percentage and you can only get out 15 minutes or 12 minutes and you can't complete the 20, then you've chosen too hard of a pace, and you need to back it down and learn to recover while you're still moving. Tim, do you have anything to add on this workout?
No, I think that's great. The other beauty of sweet spot, it's like pushing your threshold up from below. So that's a great way to think about it. So you get almost all of the benefit of threshold training, about 95% of the benefit of threshold training, but a lot less fatigue. So you can do it 3, maybe even 4 times a week, depending on your current fitness. So it's a great workout to build your way in.
Awesome. So here's a picture of me in Alaska, a real life adventure. So my training, just to take a sample of that workout that we just talked about, that sweet spot interval workout, basically my training structure is Tuesdays and Thursday mornings are intervals that are in that similar kind of format that Tim was just talking about, the sweet spot intervals, longish intervals and multiple ones. So those are Tuesdays, Thursdays. On the weekend, Saturday, Sunday, I try to do longer rides that, you know, 2.5 to 3 hours if I can. And then in between is gravy. You know, Wednesday is a longer medium, maybe a longer medium day, you know, 2 hours up to 3 hours if I have time. And then right now, you know, due to workflow and life flow, which we all have, Mondays and Fridays are off. So I'm taking, you know, 2 full days a week off. And again, it's important that, you know, think about the stress in your life, whether it's family stress, work stress, training stress. Your body doesn't really know the difference. And so, you know, if your rest day, my rest days are Mondays, and, you know, it tends to be a very heavy work day. But I'm really trying also to, knowing that Tuesday intervals are coming up, hydrate on Mondays and drink water and still get good rest, because what's going to happen is that then your Tuesday workout of intervals is going to be a lot better quality than if you come into it already fatigued from your rest day because you've had so much life stress. And that happened to me last week. I had a pretty bad workout on Tuesday morning, and, you know, let Tim know, like, I didn't drink enough water, I didn't sleep, I wasn't sleeping well, you know, my dog ate a plastic bag, you know, and I was worried about that. And so really think about, in these next weeks coming up to the challenge, how you can look at your whole week as a whole. And it's not just about how many hours you can pound yourself on the trainer. Make your quality time 1.5, 2 hours that you have make it really quality and focused, and then take rest days and make sure that your body is absorbing the work and that you're fresh to absorb the work for the next hard day. The reason I put this picture in here is because, again, we talked about choosing a goal that scares you. 29,029 feet in less than 24 hours for me, that's pretty scary. And I'm also choosing a gravel climb, so I'm actually making it a little harder on myself
Yeah.
because it's going to be slower on the uphill, and it's going to be not as restful on the downhill. But you know what? I wanted to choose something that I'd never done before, and that would keep me honest and make me show up for work each day and make me show up for my workouts. And also I know all you guys are going to be watching, so I have to attempt it, and whether I achieve it or not, like I said, the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to be in great shape by the time it comes up. I've committed to a goal, and I've gotten a bunch of friends to come along with me and do something good for COVID relief. And you know, this Alaska picture, the Iditarod was a race I said I would never do because I'm not good in cold. I have bad circulation. I have lung issues in cold weather. But I went to do it because there was a commitment level there. And I've done it now my second year in a row and survived both times with all my fingers and all my toes. And what I feel like is that, you know, I've said all along that you know, oh, I'm training for this race or I'm training for that event. But after Alaska, you know, it's the hardest thing I've done in my life. And 7 days in the Alaskan wilderness, self-supported. And what I realized coming back from that event is that I haven't been training for races my whole life. The races have been training me for life all along. And so I came back from that event stronger, more confident, able to try to tackle, you know, being in the middle of a global pandemic. And so, you know, choosing something really big and gnarly and scary, it's not just about that one day. It's about the person that you are going to be on the other end of it, making a really good commitment to yourself and a really massive commitment, telling your family and all of us about it. Whether you succeed at the elevation challenge or not, you're going to succeed at being a stronger, more competent, more fit, better person at the end of it. And I really do believe that our races and our events are training us for life. And some of my tips while you embark on this big gnarly challenge, number one is accountability. It's the reason I have a coach. I tried to do it on my own for a while and it really just doesn't work. It's the reason I launched this challenge, is because by holding myself accountable and inviting all of you to the party, I know that I'm going to show up. And if you don't have a coach, grab a friend, get 5 friends to sign up with you. Tell your spouse you're doing this and get their support. There is so much power in community and having somebody say, well, why didn't you do that workout? Or how's your training going? And checking in with you weekly. We're strong individuals, but if you're anything like me, you know, we're stronger as a group. And I find if I try to do something by myself and I don't have a little bit of support, even if it's a 24-hour solo event, I've still got teammates there. I've got a mechanic there. I've got a coach who's helping me. All of those things help me rise to the occasion that I wouldn't do on my own. And it's the same reason you sign up for a race or an event. The races don't really matter, you know, unless you're an Olympian or world champion. What matters is that collective energy. You rise to the occasion when you've set a commitment, you set a goal, and you show up. And there's other people who are actually making you stronger and helping you perform. And so accountability is one of the number one things I can say when you're choosing this goal, is put it out on social media, share it with your friends, get a couple people to join with you, engage with me on social media, and we'll hold you accountable. And if you have the benefit of a coach, awesome. If you don't, take Tim and mine, take my training week and build it out for yourself and put it down on paper, put it in your calendar, put it in your work calendar. and hold yourself accountable to that. The other thing is that I have this thing called the 80% rule, and I'm a perfectionist. I beat myself up a lot when I'm not perfect. And, Tim will lay out a schedule, or I'll have all these goals or checklists for the day. And I beat myself up if I'm not 100% perfect every day. And what I have really learned is that 80% is good enough. And if you can be 80% there 100% of the time, that's a lot better than, like Tim said, going out on a weekend and doing a 10-hour ride to make up for a lousy training week where you did nothing all week. And then you're just like, oh, I'm going to cram it all in on the weekends. Consistency, and maybe you plan a 2-hour ride and you get in an hour and a half. Like, that is okay. That's better than nothing. And cramming doesn't really work. And so maybe you're biting off little smaller chunks each day, but you're doing a little something every day that is contributing to your long-term goal. So I have an 80% rule that if you get most of the way there, that's probably okay, and then you're doing pretty great. The other thing I would say, and my last tip here, is changing the narrative, and this has a lot to do with the kind of self-talk that we tell ourselves, like, oh, I'm not strong enough, I should be doing more, my friends on social media, they're all rocking it, Rebecca's never loses motivation. Change the narrative. And I find that we often, me included, we're very cruel to ourselves in the words that we say. And so I have a little strategy that I use if I'm out, and I do a lot of training alone. If I'm out and I'm kind of beating myself up, I did it today on the trainer. We had 4 intervals to do, and by the third one, I was kind of beating myself up. And I changed the narrative in my head. So instead of me saying, God, Rebecca, like, you're not maintaining, you're not doing it, I pretend like I'm talking to my friend Caroline, and she's one of my training buddies, and I pretend like if she was sitting there next to me, would I say those words? God, Caroline, you suck today. How come you're not doing it? Like, you should just quit. Just get off the bike now. I would never say those things to her. And so sometimes I have to take myself out of the conversation and pretend like I'm talking to a friend or even a stranger. And so changing the narrative in your own head, don't use words on yourself that you wouldn't use for a friend. Be kind and treat yourself as your best friend, because you truly are the one person you have to live with for your entire life. So you might as well be nice to that person. And then I also think about in my hard training when I'm like, oh, this sucks, this is really hard. This is especially now in the time of a pandemic. We get to do this. We are healthy and well, and we get to ride our bikes. And on my 4th interval today, which ended up being a really good one, even though I didn't think I could finish it, I closed my eyes and I relished in the feeling of the pain and the hurt, and just going, wow, I get to feel this. How lucky am I? Instead of, when will it be over? And so our voice is very powerful. Our brain is probably our most powerful training tool. And so when you find yourself caught in those narratives, which you will, we've all got a devil and angel on our shoulders. Pretend like you're talking to your friend, or pretend like you're talking to me. What would you say to me in those down moments? And so that voice in your head is very powerful. So tell it to shut up when it needs to shut up. I know Jan's voice says shut up legs all the time. I like to say shut up brain. And so if it's not being nice to you, if your head's not being nice to you, just turn it off for a minute.
I think that's some great advice there, Rebecca. That's so important, that self-talk. And people ask me all the time, as a coach who works with a lot of professional athletes, they always put these great scenarios together between, if you took these 2 athletes and one had a threshold to this and the other one had a threshold to that, and one was a sprinter and one was more of a long, which one wins? And I always say, whoever's mentally stronger. So I love that example as how you train that way, because it translates into performance. What's going on, that voice in your head as you're describing it, is very powerful. And the ability, when we train, right, we spend, as endurance athletes, we spend a lot of hours training, and we don't, all training, one of my kind of famous quotes are, all training requires both a physiological and a psychological response. And you might as well do both at the same time. And that's what you were doing today. So I think that's a great tip to give everybody. You control that narrative, you change the narrative in your mind, and you'd be surprised what your body will do when you ask it. So great tip. Okay, I have one last slide on science, and then we're going to tackle the Q&A. We talked about whether we should put the tapering in some of the later presentations, but the reality is, as you're planning your next 3 weeks, it was probably important to give you insight now so you could actually lay out the plan. So you can download this PowerPoint presentation as a PDF right out of the control panel on the left. There's a section that says handouts, and you'll notice yours says 1 of 5. If you click on that, it'll allow you to download the presentation so you have all of this and you have a chart like this to kind of do your own planning. When you start talking about this idea of tapering, it's this mythical final prep that happens for athletes. And we tend to think that we should just, when we get 7, 10, 14, 21 days before our event, we just shut down, right? And we shut off. Well, two things about that that make it a myth are most mature athletes will perform better without a traditional taper. And what I mean by mature here is, if you see in my top little brown boxes, is they've been seriously training for 2 to 3 years or more, right? Once we develop a certain amount of training memory, we have a certain amount of efficiency built within the system, the actual downtime of tapering can be as negative to performance as the rest would help you. So the cost is too high. Now, that might be slightly different for less mature athletes. So in this case, and I'm not talking about their personal maturity or anything like that. I always hate using those terms because it just opens up the jokes. But the reality is, how many years have you been training at a serious, like a reasonably serious volume and following a training schedule and efforts? So if you're less than 2 years into that, and it's not a light switch at 2 years, you suddenly qualify, it's just an estimate. You have two different types of things you should look at in your taper. I recommend for this type of event, somewhere, probably both groups benefit from about a 7-day taper. But a taper doesn't mean time off. Tapering means you change the frequency, volume, and intensity of your work. So a quick review through these recommendations. If you're a mature athlete, you really don't need to reduce the frequency, the number of days you're training per week, any. Or maybe, just depend, you got a little extra load in the legs, drop 1 day out of your taper week. If you're less mature and just getting into training and you don't have that training efficiency yet, you don't have that kind of muscle memory, that 10,000 miles built up in your legs, you want to reduce your frequency of training maybe 1 to 2 days per week. When it comes to volume, and frequency is the number of days a week you're training. When it comes to volume, how long is each workout? Let's say you're doing a 20-hour workout week or a 10-hour workout week, and I pick those because the math is simple, right? And if you're a mature athlete, you only want to reduce about 20 to 30%. Even if that, a very mature, I have, athletes that have been training at, very high levels for 10, 15 years, they might only reduce 10 to 20% at most, because it shuts down their system. So for most of us, 20, if you're a mature athlete, 20 to 30%. So if you're training 10 hours a week, cut it down to 7 to 8. If you're a less mature athlete training 10 hours a week, cut it down to 5 to maybe 7. The reality is you're bringing down that overall training volume. The place that most people get tapering wrong is they think that means take all of the intensity out of your training. And that's a mistake, because your body needs that intensity to maintain certain adaptation to performance. And I don't mean adaptation like long-term, I mean performance readiness, the ability to go hard when you need it, to utilize energy. So if you're a mature athlete, you want to reduce intensity by about 40 to 50%. So a mature athlete, use Rebecca's 2 times 20 SST workout, or maybe you're like today, we did an hour's worth of that. So we actually did 4 times 15 today. So you might reduce that workout down in half, or maybe down to about 2/3, right? We might have done, instead of doing a full 60 minutes, maybe we did 30 to 40 minutes. That's how that workout would get adjusted during this taper. We don't want to go, particularly for the mature athlete, you don't want to go to 0 intensity. You won't, you're an oversimplification, your energy systems will literally start to shut down. So you want to keep that intensity, you want to keep that same, the body still wants to feel it, so it's ready to go come performance day. If you're a less mature athlete training less than 2 years or more, you want to reduce that intensity by 50 to 70%. So there, the less mature athlete does want to take a pretty big step, down. So let's just say, again, you were doing that same hour of SST, you might now reduce it to 20 or 30 minutes. Or if you were doing the sample workout of 40 minutes of SST, you might want to reduce that down to 15, anywhere between 12 to 15 minutes, maybe 10 to 15 minutes even, maybe 10 to 20 if you really feel good about that 50%. It really depends. You also have to feel your way through your own taper. One overarching tip, if you're not sure, don't over rest. I know that sounds like counterintuitive and it's a dangerous tip to give, so be careful here. If you're going to rest during your taper, take the extra day off, right? But when it comes to volume and intensity, do what you plan to do. If you're just like, wow, my legs are tired, I just feel like I would be better if I rested a little more, don't reduce a little more volume and a little more intensity out of every workout. Take an extra day off. The best and most effective resting technique is actually resting. It works great. So just go with that one if it comes down. That should hopefully give you a little information. The next 2 weeks, good focus on building threshold, good consistent workout, do a fair amount of sweet spot training, focus on consistency, build accountability with yourself. And then the 3rd week, as you kind of taper into your event, this should give you some pretty good guidance. So based on that, I'm going to open up the Q&A. I am going to facilitate, so if it looks like I'm looking at a different screen, I am looking above, so it's not that I'm not paying attention, but I'm going to read some of the questions. I have a feeling we answered a fair amount of questions in here, but I'm going to tackle them. So Rebecca, how about I ask the question and you take a shot at the answer? I think most of these are named to you anyway, so it's great.
Okay.
Would you discuss the difference in approach, preparation, and recovery between the full attempt and the baked potato?
Approach, preparation, and recovery. The approach to me is going to be the same. You're looking at over 15,000 feet versus almost 30, and so like Tim said, you're gonna build your next couple of weeks of consistent training, and obviously you have a little bit of a different goal, but in this short amount of time, like I said, we're starting where we are, and so you're not gonna gain a ton of extra fitness in less than 3 weeks, but you are really gonna top off what you have and where you're coming from. The Everest attempt, for example, for me, it's going to be, I'm estimating 22 to 24 hours if everything goes just right. And so on the flip side, even if you're doing the 15,000 foot attempt, that's still going to be, 15 plus hour day, depending on the hill that you're choosing. So it's still well over what I would think of a kind of a threshold of like a 7, 8 long 1 day ride, like less than 12 hours versus plus 12 hours. In my mind, once you get into that ultra endurance zone, the preparation is still going to be very similar in your training. The difference in your equipment obviously is going to be lights versus no lights. More time, a little bit more time, a lot more time on the bike, probably twice as much time on the bike. So I make some equipment considerations that we're going to go into the next webinar. Things like the shoes you wear, the bar wrap that you have on your tape. The recovery for me for a 24-hour, a really long event like that, full recovery is probably a few weeks. That doesn't mean you're sitting on your butt for 3 weeks, but it takes me about 3 weeks from something really big like this. And, no matter what elevation you choose, hopefully this is a maximal effort for you. And so probably people at many of the levels are going to take a good few weeks to feel physically, but also emotionally ready to kind of get after it again. And so, typically I'm pretty beat up the week after physically. And then the second week, like I want to start doing stuff, but I'm just kind of tired in my head. And then by the 3rd week, the mind and the body seem to match up and I start wanting to do harder workouts again and focusing for another goal. So I hope that answers your question. Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a great answer. I mean, the approach really is the same. And Kate, I see that you meant the queens and the mashed potato. I think the reality is it's very well said. The focus is the same. If we had, if you were doing 8 or 10 weeks of preparation, you might say a little different. At this point, you're kind of tackling it with the fitness you have with some fine tuning in the next couple of weeks. The only thing I would say is most of us are capable of more than we think. And I think this goes back to Rebecca's challenge to go for it, go that next step up, and you'd be surprised if you go at it with the right mentality, what you can do. I think the approach of all of them has to be, this is a challenge, and this is a time we need that challenge. So I think it's a good combo. Okay, next question. I think I'll tackle this one here. I'll tell you why. I noticed that when I upload my ride stats from my GPS cycling device to Strava, the numbers come out different, including elevation gain. Which one do I use to track my ride during the challenge? And then a second question, that is, should I record the Strava phone app at the same time?
I'd say use whichever gives you like the bigger elevation and the best numbers. Use that one.
One says 100 feet, one says 1,000 feet, take the 1,000, put it in the bank. No, I would say, it's funny, your GPS and data and your elevation change by your head unit device, your elevation change is done by barometric pressure. So let's say a storm rolls in while you're climbing. We all know that we have differences in weather between low and high pressure. That changes your elevation on your device actually pretty significantly depending on that change. So that's exactly why you want to do the pre-calculation in advance. You need to know your climb is, 11.9 times or 15.2 times, whatever that number is, because you don't want to make the mistake of having your Garmin say you made it. And then you go home and you load the file and you're like, oh no, I was 100 feet short, right? So make sure you math out the challenge. The data on Strava in the segments, that's done off of what's called ground control, which is literally a terrain map, like an actual correct number. So you can count on that number in Strava, you can count on that number in Velo Viewer, so you can count on those numbers. It's only when you're looking at that head unit that it could be that off.
And I'd say the question too, like, should I record it on the Strava app and the Garmin and every other technology bit of piece I can just to make sure I get it? Yeah, if you have a phone and the battery life is the one thing to consider, but there's nothing wrong with recording it twice just to be sure you've got it. I can't tell you how many, when I rode the Kokopelli Trail, I like stopped and started my Garmin like 5 times to be sure I'd done it right. And I started at midnight. It was an individual time trial, and I could start whenever I wanted. And I actually rode up the road like 30 seconds, and then I'm like, oh, I didn't start my Garmin. So I like rode back, and my husband and my mechanic, they're like, what's wrong? Like, you just started. I'm like, I forgot to start my Garmin. So I started over. So knowing that you're in control of your attempt, but just double check your technology every once in a while. And if you have the ability and the battery power to record it twice, go for it. Why not?
Excellent advice. All right, Rebecca, here's another question for you. Do you work in any lifting strength during this time? Lifting / strength work during this time? She's ready to roll.
I did, well, a little bit. I did do quite a bit of strength training leading into Alaska because that bike is so heavily loaded. There's a lot of hike-a-bike. And so I have a pull-up bar in my basement. I do push-ups, sit-ups. So typically I do a bit of sort of functional strength work, but really more for my overall fitness as a human, not necessarily for this challenge. And so I would say, you know, if you don't typically do that stuff, I wouldn't just start a big heavy lifting program right now. But I think everybody should do sit-ups, push-ups, pull-ups, some rubber bands in your basement. And a lot of that, especially if you are a single sport athlete and, you know, a cyclist only or a runner only, we get into positions of like getting hunched over the bike. And there's a lot to be said for balance. I will say, as you get more and more tired for a really long ultra endurance event, you're going to be recruiting, because your legs are going to be tired, you're going to be recruiting like muscles in your elbows and everywhere that you can, to be efficient. And so if your core is strong, your neck is strong, it's just going to allow you more comfort on the bike. And when your legs and your sort of main muscles that you're using are really starting to go, you're still able to keep your posture, you're still able to actually like hold on to the handlebars. So yeah, I would say a couple of days, maybe 3 days a week of just some push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, you know, lunges. When I'm out hiking, I do walking lunges with the dogs all the time. I know some friends who are doing 10 burpees for every conference call, Zoom call that they're doing. So, you know, it's easy to throw in some stuff like that that's just really great for you leading into the challenge, but just as a human and an athlete.
Great answer. I agree. I will only add this tip. People ask me that question all the time, and all cyclists ask me all the time, should I lift weights? And I say, are you 40 plus? And they say, yes. I say, yes. And they're like, well, what time of year? And I'm like, yes. If you're 40
Yeah.
plus, you should always be doing some type of strength building. Rebecca said something that was so vital there, that sometimes an over focus on this idea of performance training, we forget about your whole body health is going to determine your long-term performance. So the better you take care of the whole system, the better you will perform. If you're over 40, the answer is yes. And for most people under 40, the answer is yes, just the timing and when might be different. But I think that's a great answer.
And if you have little, like you get up, your back is sore most days, or you've got this thing in your shoulder, or, you know, all of us have those things. If you're starting, those things are creeping up, it's a sure sign that you need to work on your mobility and overall strength in other areas.
Great point. Okay, next question. I'll tackle this one. It's kind of a little science of the training. Is it okay to incorporate extra lower effort time on sweet spot days since it's relatively short? Yes, Michelle, absolutely. So the workout was really just demoing a core. So one of the tricks I might give you here, right? So let's say you have 2.5 hours to ride. You're normally training maybe 12 to 14 hours a week, and today is a 2.5 hour ride. Go out and ride for 90 minutes first and then do the sweet spot, right? One of the things that you know, in training and exercise, we have what's called the specificity principle. And if you apply a specific stimuli, you'll get a specific response. So the reality is, you know, one of the things we're thinking about stamina style events, we're going to be going for a long time, is, you know, doing intervals. We're so used to just warming up 15, 20 minutes, and then we jump right into our intervals, right? Well, you can do them later in workouts and it will help build some stamina. If these were more intensive work, you know, intervals, I might say don't do them now because the event is so close, but sweet spot, that's the beauty of it. It's not so intense and so draining. So maybe, you know, add some time before, add some time after, but definitely make that endurance time and time in zone 2. And I'll give you one other tip about your endurance time. Most athletes, most kind of training category, local racer type of cyclists do their zone 2, their endurance work too hard. So whether you're using power or heart
No,
rate,
we all do. And because
yeah,
we figure, oh, well, if I go harder, I'll get more benefit. And so I'm going to do, you know, this harder. I'm just going to cram it all in, and it's going to be 110% better than doing the workout that was prescribed.
more is not more. It really isn't, because there's a cost to everything you do. If the fatigue outweighs the response, you're only creating more fatigue than response, right? So good casual mid-range endurance, not pushing endurance to your tongue's kind of hanging out and you're sweating all over your bike. Do the intervals well, get them out of the way, ride some good endurance. Or vice versa and build some fatigue resistance. All
I
right,
know
Rebecca,
with
here's a
me,
question.
if you have a training buddy or you're allowed to ride together and you can do so safely outside with social distancing, you know, those kind of workouts and that kind of endurance time is where I really cherish, I might go out to a hill with a friend and we do our intervals separately because we're different paces, but then it's really nice to do a long warm up or a long cool down socially, if somebody else is there and we're chatting, it actually forces me to stay in that endurance range.
That's great. Great point. All right, Rebecca, here's a question for you. We have two more questions, so we'll take these final two here. Here's the question. I've been training for life basically for the past few months, including 2 days per week of lifting. One of those days, heavy lifting, and slow weight loss, less than 0.5 pounds per week for the last 3 months. Should I drop the strength training for the next 3 weeks to focus on the bike training? What about the weight loss? Question mark. Is it advisable to forego the calorie deficit, or does it really matter since it's been so small anyway?
Tim, I'm going to send that to you. That sounds like a
Yeah,
sciencey
I
question.
didn't. Now that I read it through, I can tackle that. Let's go in reverse, Kate. It's always the reality is under eating is overtraining. Write that down, right? And it's so hard for me to get this into people's heads. Now there's times in our life and in our season and whatever, right, where it's worth, or you might find it specifically worthwhile to reduce calories in the name of losing weight because there's some specific gain that you're looking for. But you will, very rarely will a training athlete gain fitness, improve something like threshold or FTP, and I know you know what that means, while they're cutting weight, any weight. Your body, to be able to restore and trigger adaptation, and appropriate adaptation, needs to not be in a calorie deficit mode. Most of us who train actually struggle to lose weight because we don't eat enough, but to be more specific, we don't eat enough of the right things. So without getting too deep into it, that answers that question. That then steps back into the weight loss. So I probably wouldn't, but you're so light in your losses. If your diet is healthy and good, I wouldn't think about it too much, but maybe throw a little more calorie back into it so you're at a good balance level. When it comes to removing the strength training right now, yeah, I probably would, right? Because completing the full or the half type of event is going to take a fair amount of muscular capacity. You're going to be doing a lot of, there's going to be a lot of contraction and expansion of those fibers, right? And you probably want that to be as fresh as possible. So here's a great opportunity. Strength training for performance athletes is like farming, right? There's times that you plant and there's times that you harvest, right? And if you really understand how that rhythm works, it's super important. So you've been planting, you kind of tilled the field, you got your seeds in, you've been watering, you've got everything going in the right direction. You might want to take the next 2 to 3 weeks and harvest, take advantage of that new strength, and translate the time that you were strength training to on the bike time. Don't just leave a void, and you'll probably be better for that. So that would be my 2 recommendations for tackling your question. All right, Rebecca, we got one more question. This one's for you, even though I think we both know the answer. Does the challenge have to be done all on the same climb?
Yes, if you want to be recorded on Strava and in the leaderboard and go with the official sort of Everesting rules, and I didn't make these rules up, we adopted the Everesting rules just to keep it simple for people to give some guidelines. So yes, if you want to be scored officially in that way, it needs to be one climb. It can be really long, really short, and you do that climb repeated times until you hit the elevation challenge. That said, if you just want to do it in any fashion that you want to do it, go for it. Like I just want to get people out riding. I want to motivate people, motivate myself. And so it's fine if you don't want to be scored on the leaderboard and like do it however you want to do it. But just know that if you want to like go for the prizes and the rankings and all that, that we are going to stick with those Everesting rules. Tim, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think that's great. Actually, the person who posted that is a friend of mine who lives and rides kind of locally. The challenge for us is that we don't have a big climb. Literally, the climb I had on the screen called Big Flat is the biggest climb we have, probably in a 100-mile radius. So maybe a 75-mile radius. So it's not easy. And I think that's for the people watching these webinars and making selection. That's why you want to do the math first, because it might impact. For me, I really want to do the Everest, but the challenge of having only shorter climbs around has me, to be honest, considering doing it indoors. So Evans, that might be a way to tackle it, is to do it indoors.
Are you trying to make excuses, Tim?
No, and yes, I'm going to do one or the other, I think. But the reality is, it is definitely harder to do here because the ride I showed is the longer climb. And yeah, Evans, I live on Wagner Gap, and that's shorter. Yeah, Big Flat is bigger, right? And that's why you want to spend some time really thinking out your challenge. And in fact, for us to do it on Big Flat, and Evans, if you want to do it, I'll do it with you. But it's 20.9 repetitions. So
I have to do 20 repetitions on my climb. It's all
yeah,
right.
that's true. That's true. Actually, I said 20.9. It's 26.9 on Big Flat. It's some bigger number. No, that's right. It is about 20. Your climb's a little higher. As a matter of fact, it's kind of funny you say that. Let's talk about your challenge as we close it out here. So the Queen of Pains Everest looks like this, you guys. You get the bonus slide. She's doing it on the baked potato climb, the climb that is part of the event, Trail Creek Climb, as you see the segment here. It's 1,400 feet of climb. So she needs 20.3 repetitions. Didn't mean to end that. So she's got 20.3 repetitions. Evans, the Big Flat climb, what we would look at is 1,100 feet. So my quick math is we would need about 26 climbs on Big Flat. So
and it's not gravel. It's not gravel, right?
It's not gravel. I thought about doing gravel here, and we have some really good gravel climbs. It's just complicated because of some of the things our state is going through right now, so I'm a little hesitant to use them. But that's
Yeah,
what we're
I
still
want to
shop.
emphasize that, please choose something that is legal, that is safe, that is well within whatever your state jurisdiction is. If you have a friend who's joining you, please make sure to maintain social distancing. We have to, you guys. It's the whole point of this ride, is to raise money for COVID relief. So please make sure that you're being responsible. What I love about this conversation between, you, Tim, and your friend, you're like, which hill should I do? And trying to calculate it. I mean, that's a sign of a truly good adventure. If you're not sure you can do it, you think it's going to be really hard, it makes your hands sweat, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know. Like that's the sign of a really good, hard adventure. And so I love hearing this conversation going around. Let's go back to this slide for the next webinars that we'll be doing. So I think we should probably wrap, you guys. We've been an hour and 15 minutes, and this has been really fun. Tim, thank you for sharing your expertise. And thanks for those of you who came. It's really fun to kind of get excited for your challenge with you. The next two, we're going to do same time, same place, the next Tuesday and the following Tuesday. So the next Tuesday is going to be planning your attempt, a little bit more about equipment, kind of a little more nitty gritty. So go out, find your hill, and then we'll dive into some more of the details on nutrition, equipment, that kind of stuff. And then the third one will be really executing your challenge, how to set up your little rest area, how to pace yourself, those kinds of things. We will be publishing this on YouTube and sharing it around. So if anyone missed it, or you want to encourage your friends and get somebody stoked as part of your accountability team, we'll be putting all this out on social media. And I do just want to remind you guys to bring a friend along. Rebecca's Giddyup Challenge. The whole point of this is, like I said, to challenge yourself, to connect our community, and do something really good for COVID relief. And my hope is that eventually we're not doing these challenges on our own turf, but we're all doing them together. And I really look forward to riding with all of you on social media. If you have questions, you've shared your hill, you found your hill, or you want to share any of your preparation, go ahead and tag me. Our hashtag is GiddyUpForGood, and my social media is at Rebecca Rusch, pretty easy to find. But please include us in your preparation as part of your accountability team, and we'll be stoked to get ready for this together. Tim, do you have anything to add?
I think that's great. Appreciate everybody taking on the challenge and helping us raise some funds to kind of fight the COVID effect. And just thanks for coming out today.
Happy birthday, Tim.
I knew you were going to sneak that in there. Thanks, Kate, and the other people who said happy birthday. All right,
Giddy up.
everybody, we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.